Welcome everyone to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, April 20th. We are so fortunate to be meeting on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Councillor Herkard, seconded by Councillor Pettengill. Any opposed? Carries. We have to pass Ministerial Order M192 that during these times with limited public participation at our meetings, the district is ensuring openness, transparency, accessibility, accountability at this meeting by ensuring that the meeting is being live streamed. A video of this meeting will be available on our website for viewing on an on-demand basis. And the meeting is open to the public for electronic participation via WebEx. Someone pass that motion? By Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Grace. Any opposed? Motion carries. Just a reminder, Council, we are meeting electronically, so please keep your phone and computer on mute. Please let me know if you're leaving the meeting or returning to the meeting so this can be recorded in the minutes. If you're having any technical difficulties, corporate officers here, you can text her. And in case of a vote, you only have to state a nay vote. No statements required if you're in the affirmative. All right, so here we go. Item 4, staff reports. We are going to be considering our 2021 tax rate, and finance team has a presentation for us. Over to you, Mr. Russell.
I'm going to share my screen and hopefully should be this one. Okay, can you see a presentation that says 2021 property taxation?
We can.
Wonderful.
Oh, except for a few dialogue boxes that have popped up.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Perhaps I need to switch screens. So. There. Hopefully that should be better without dialogue boxes.
It is, but we just need to go into presentation mode because we can see your next slide.
Are you? Oh, sorry. I think my apologies.
Thanks. That's perfect. Yeah.
I think that's where we're at, what we're after. Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. My name is Roland Russell. I am Senior Financial Analyst for Planning and Budgeting here at District of Squamish. We are here to meet today to talk about 2021 property taxation. The goals of today's presentation are related to providing a property tax orientation and selecting direction from council on both the port rate and confirmation of property tax ratios. With respect to the property tax orientation, just a short reminder of the mechanics of taxation. BC Assessment Authority determines the assessment. Municipalities set the tax rate. Tax revenue requirement was determined earlier this year with the approval of the financial plan. The assessment divided by 1,000 times tax rate would equal the tax payable. The rates are set by property class, and that reference is in respect to the fact that all properties within a specific property class must be charged the same rate unless those properties are exempt or maybe capped. Multipliers or ratios can be used to create a relationship between a specific class and the residential class. So multiplier or tax ratio is always taken in comparison to the residential class. So there are a number of influences on the assessment base. One is market change, another within various neighborhoods, another is market change within the type or range of housing. There's also non-market changes, which reflect the actual assessment change due to improvements from one year to the next, and that's viewed by property or by property class. And the last thing to remind one of is that an average is a ratio. It is a calculation. So it is the number or the dollar amount of the total class divided by the total number of properties. It does not necessarily represent the impact on an individual property within that class, but the average reflects the overall grouping. That being said, we'll move on and speak briefly about some of the other influences on our assessment and taxes, and that is with respect to restrictions and caps. For Class 2 utilities, we have a cap of $40 for each $1,000 of assessed value, and that is the cap that has been in place for a number of years, and we are planning to maintain that, as far as I know, unless I'm given direction to adjust it. There are also restrictions and caps applied to the port, and this is in accordance with the Ports Property Act, and the rate is capped at $27.5 per $1,000 of assessment. Apologies. And there's also a sub rate there, which is a cap tax rate for new improvements of $22.5. We should note that this year in 2020, there was just over $1 million worth of new improvements added at the port, and that obviously is going to be taxed and therefore will increase the amount of taxation that we receive from the port. And because these rates are capped, the province provides compensation to local governments to offset a portion of taxes that would be applied if they could, say, increase the cap, or if the cap was set at the same level as utilities, as an example. Now, with respect to that, a few years ago, there was a fire at the port, and as a result of that, council reduced the port property tax from the cap rate of 27.5 down to 25. And then over time, it's been phased back in. And in 2021, this will be the last year of that phase in. And so the recommendation by administration is that it move from 27, which is the amount in 2020, to 27.5. So that's the brief overview and commentary on how taxes work, sort of thing. So now what we want to talk about is a comparison of years to years. Stop there. Sorry?
Councilor Race has a question.
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Russell, with respect to the port tax rate, my understanding or my recollection was that when we did that last term, we reduced the rate below from 27.5 down to, I think it was around 26, to give some relief to the port. But really, we couldn't give relief just to the port business. We lowered the entire Class 4 rate down to 26. And then we've been bringing it slowly back up. But when we get to 27.5, of course, the port stops. It doesn't go any higher, but the Class 4 rate would still be below the pre-fire levels. And so that's where we have to raise the class 4 rate as a whole up to, I think, 30 point something or other. Am I correct in saying that?
I think that that's a reasonable analysis, Councillor Race. And we will be showing you the ratios shortly, and we'll outline, administration will outline their plan to deal with that topic that you just raised. So I'm about to answer
Mr.
your
Russell, we have a major industry rate already set. And then we have a port and port improvement rate under class 4. So we have that distinction.
That
So
is correct.
that's 30. So they are not blended council rates.
But with respect, my recollection was that we could not just lower the port rate because that's providing a benefit to a business. And we lowered the entire class 4 rate, which is ported subject to, because the 27.5 is a cap. It can be below that. And so we took the whole class 4 rate, except that there were no other class 4 industries, and took the whole thing down to 26. And so we've been bringing, I think, the whole class 4 rate back up 0.5 a year. And now we're going to be at 27.5. But really, we can go up to whatever with the class 4 rate because the port stops regardless at 27.5 because of the provincial cap. So I don't know that it is a blended rate. I know it shows up as two different lines on our schedules in the report, but I think it has to be the same class 4 rate. It's just that in respect to the port, it's capped.
Through the chair, if I can address that.
Go ahead.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump onto our next slide, actually. And to address that question that was raised, these are the ratios that were in place in 2020. So this is last year. So last year, we had recognized the concern that you were raising, Councillor Race, and we had adjusted it at that point in time. The direction was to set the class 4 major industry tax rate equal to the BC average. And because the port improvement is a subset of class 4 and it's created under a specific act of parliament, well, I guess BC legislature rather than federal parliament, there can be different rates in class 4, but only for major industry and for port at this time, because port is governed by a specific act which provides for the cap. So at this time in 2020, the major industry rate for class 4 was set equal to the BC average. So I hope that that answers the question that you had raised.
Go ahead, Councillor Race.
Well, it doesn't, because I can understand the port improvement, that's legislated at 22.5. But the port at 27, frankly, that confuses me when we also have a major industry rate at 30.26. And I don't know how we distinguish between the two of them because they're both class 4 without providing a benefit to a specific business, which we're not allowed to do. So my understanding was we dropped the whole class 4 rate down to, I think it started off at 26. And then we've been bringing the whole class 4 rate back up 0.5 a year. And when we get to 27.5, the port stops because of legislation again. And then our class 4 rate would go up. And so I can't explain that honestly. That's just not my understanding of the way it happened. I think we end up in the same place this year with the port at 27.5, like the recommendation says, and the class 4 going to 30. But in my mind, they should have gone hand in hand up until we hit 27.5, and then we can carry on with the major industry rate. So I don't know. We can't change history, but I'm not sure how we did that, to be honest.
I have a different recollection, Councillor Race, which is the last council actually asked staff to create the major industry rate last term. And so we've been doing that for a while. And that because of the port legislation, we were able to lower their rate and transition it back up to the 27.5 over time.
Well, I remember the
rate for major.
I remember the decision to raise the class 4 rate to 30. I thought that predated the fire, actually, but I just don't understand how the two become disconnected below 27.5. When we took the port down to 26, why the whole class 4 rate didn't have to go down to 26. So as I say, it's history, and I don't want to belabor it right now. I think we'll end up this year where we have to be, but I just don't understand how port at 27 is not the class 4 rate, unless there's some special legislation I'm not aware of that allows us to change the cap. I'm not sure if we can do that, but if we can, then that would explain it.
Okay, so we can move on?
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Russell.
So these are the rates and ratios that were in place in 2020. And this slide and this information is being provided for comparative purposes. We also want to provide a comparison of the ratios within the Sea to Sky corridor. So these ratios, you'll note that it says 2020 comparatives. Well, obviously we can only provide 2020 because we don't know what the 2021 numbers are going to be for other municipalities because they haven't set their tax rates yet. So we're below Whistler and we're above Pemberton, and that's about standard. And that's more or less where we have been for a number of years. And in both instances, for both business and light industry, we are below the BC average. And the commentary that I would make on that is Council has provided direction to administration, and the direction that's been provided to administration with respect to policies pertaining to tax rates and ratios is to maintain a competitive ratio for class 5 light industry. And our interpretation of that is, our administration's interpretation of that is that if we are below the level of the BC average, that will be competitive. And using the same rationale, it allows us to maintain a business class or class 6 multiplier that encourages business investment. And again, we believe that if we're below the BC average, then that could be viewed as an inducement to doing business here in the district of Squamish. So on a comparative basis, our business and light industry ratios meet the requirements that were set out by council. And in conjunction with that, we'll show you a display of what the proposed 2021 district ratios and the port rate. And again, so you will see here that in 2021, the tax rate for residential has gone down slightly from 2020, and we'll explain that shortly. The utilities rate is capped at 40. The port rate meets the cap on both regards, port and port improvements. Major industry is set equal to the BC average. I am looking at the ratios for light industry and business as commented on previously, are below the BC average, and recreation and farm properties are charged at the same rate as residential. Make a comment that on an overall average, the port weighted average ratio is 9.2, which is slightly higher than the BC average for class 4, but nonetheless, it is in that range between between the 27 and the 22. And this gives you an idea of where it would be. On a comparative basis now, our ratio for major industry is about 10.6, so a little higher than the port ratio, and that's reflected in the fact that major industry ratio is 30 and the port ratio is capped. I want to talk about the amount of tax that we are attempting to recover, and also how that's being collected, or who's going to end up paying for what share. So in 2020, the general property tax revenue was just over 30 million, 30.05 million. In 2021, in the development of the financial plan, we increased the general tax revenue requirement to 32 million, which was a 6.5% increase. We've had very significant non-market change or growth in new assessment this year to the tune of $1.8 million plus, just over 6%. So it leaves a remainder of tax increase of just under $120,000. So approximately a 0.4% percentage points of the 2020 tax amount needs to be raised from existing properties. So to be fair, we got off light this year because of significant increase in new development. Okay.
Just a moment, Councilor Race. I'd just like to finish these slides.
So I'm going to speak to this slide, and then I'll pause for a moment if there are questions. What we're showing here is the average impacts of the 2021 proposal. And this proposal includes a rate increase on the port from $27 per thousand of assessment to 27.5, the maximum rate allowed by the cap. As a result of that, the port class 4 port increased by 5.1%. Light industry went down. The reason that light industry went down is that we have a combination of two things. Number one, we had a conversion of light industry. We had a reduction in assessment associated with light industry. And also we had a reduction in the residential rate. And so through the multiplier effect of the ratio, that drove the light industry rate down even more. You'll see that the business rate and the residential rate are both showing increases, and those are showing increases on average. And it should be pointed out that, again, that's due to the nature of the calculation of the average. In both residential and business, a significant portion of the change year over year is a result of non-market change. It is a result of new assessment. So what you will see, and we'll explain this in the next few slides, is that there is a very reasonable possibility that existing residential and businesses may not pay increased taxes in 2021 because a lot of the growth in both of those classes is a result of new development. Of course, when we apply the rate is applied to all assessment within the class, so it's applied to new development and existing development. And so what we were seeing is a case where the increased assessment is resulting in an increased average for businesses and residential, and therefore an increased average percentage increase in the amount of the average for those two groups. At this point, I believe that there were some questions, so I will pause for a moment.
Councillor Reese?
I'll continue.
Thank you. My recollection in our budget process that we just concluded was that we were talking with non-market growth of somewhere around 3%. And now it's up around 6%. What happened?
There's a card in the Monopoly game. I believe it says bank error in your favor. That to be honest, that's more or less what happened. We got the final report, and it showed an increase of about $100 million in non-market change between the value we had in December and the value we had in March, which is like almost a third plus increase.
Wow.
And a significant portion of that increase was in business. So because of the multiplier, that generated even more tax. So it was surprising, to say the least. You know, when we came back to you with the financial plan, I think that we had suggested that at that point in time, we thought maybe a 4%, so 1.2 million. And the calculations that we got based on the revised roll, which reflects the roll after it has been reviewed and people have had an opportunity to challenge their assessed values, it came back with significant jumps in non-market change or growth for both strata and business. So a really, really big increase in the amount of revenue generated in those two areas. And to be fair, totally unexpected.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And those numbers come from BC assessment, right?
Yes, they do. The assessment numbers are all generated by BC assessment.
Thanks. Councillor Pettengill?
Yeah, thank you. Just want to make sure I understand that light industry number. I think what you're saying is that compared to last year, residential and commercial properties increase their assessed value significantly, and there's a lot more of them because there's new properties. And so light industry properties didn't actually lose value. They're just a smaller piece of the pie.
I think that would be fair. I don't have the exact assessment numbers in front of me. What I will say is this: there wasn't any growth associated with light industry. It was flat, or there was a slight dip. Okay. But I think it would be fair to suggest that on an overall basis, the amount of assessment within the light industry class in comparison to the other classes, it has gone down slightly. And as a result, it would have a lower incidence of taxation. So its tax rate appears to go down. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. So if I may, here's a nice colorful slide which outlines the changes in 2021 residential assessment. And we use the term 2021 residential assessment, but really taxes are based on assessment from the previous year. So the assessment is done. This is a 2020 assessment. So it's viewing the change in assessment that occurred last year, and that assessment, so the assessed value of property at December 31st of the previous year, is the number that is being used to, excuse me, to as the assessment base for taxation in the following year. So what we want to show you in this picture is on the left in the red, it says market 6.5%. Well, there's 6.5% increase in market assessment. That market assessment at 6.5% increase was larger, was really large. And I'm going to talk about the non-market growth component for a moment, and that's at 5.2%. So if you think of it from this perspective, we needed 6.5% overall increase in tax dollars. 5.2% of that, approximately, was going to be provided by growth from residential assessment. Just if we ignore other assessment classes for the moment. So 5.2% of that was going to be generated by other assessment classes, which leaves a small amount, just over 1%, that will be required to be increased from existing homeowners or property owners. Those existing property owners had a 6.5% increase in the assessed value of their property. So because the tax calculation is a formula, if assessed value goes up, all things being equal, tax rate goes down. And so what's happened here is we're looking at a 6.5% increase in market assessment compared to a relatively small increase in dollars required. As a result, the tax rate went down. It went down by 3.8%. Okay? And because of the multipliers that we use, because of the ratios that are implicit in our taxation model, when the residential assessment rate goes down, tax rate goes down, all of the other tax rates go down also. They go down by the value of that ratio, the ratio they are to residential. So we saw a reduction in the residential rate. You would see a 2.5 time that value reduction in the business rate. You would see a similar reduction in the light industry rate. Where you're not going to see reductions, obviously, are the rates that are capped. But, so this year is a bit of an anomaly, and that's mostly because we had a pretty stellar year in 2020 as far as assessment change comes in, both on the growth side and on the market side. So one of those kind of is what it is. So I think that that's important, and that will help you better understand what you're going to see in the next couple of slides. So this is a comparison of residential. So what we're going to show you here is that on the assessment side, average residential went up 5.2%. The average single family residential went up 9.5%. And the average strata went up by 1.6%. And those are changes in assessment, okay? As a result of that combination of change in assessment and a reduction in the tax rate, you will see that for single family residential, the 9.5% is greater than the 3.8% reduction, and therefore they're showing a 5.3% increase. Conversely, for strata, the 1.6% increase in assessed value is less than the 3.8% reduction in tax rate. As a result of that, they are showing on average a reduction in tax year to year. So here's a comparison of that same graphic, but looking strictly at single family residential. And as you can see, although the total change is just over 10% year on year, almost all of it is from market, okay? So what we're seeing here is that the market increase is greater than the reduction in tax rate. And as a result of that, you're going to see an increase in single family residential property taxes. And this, in fact, you'll see on the next slide, be pretty much across all the varying neighborhoods of the district. So on this slide, you're going to see that the assessment value here increases across the board, lower in Valley Cliff, higher in Highlands and downtown. And as a result, you're going to see varying levels of tax increase. And the comment that I would make is, in some instances in Valley Cliff, it's very small, 2.5%. Whereas on the other side of the highway, in downtown, it's projecting to be up over 10%. And again, these are specific properties that have been selected and compared year over year. And then we've done that for the purposes of consistency. This is not an average taken of properties within any of these given neighborhoods. That's not something that would be easy for us to do, given the nature of the assessment base. So we've just selected random properties and used the same properties year over year for comparative purposes. Next, we're going to show the impact on strata residential. And again, what you will see here is that theirs is almost the direct reverse. So the market change is very small. It is almost all the change in assessment in strata is related to growth. So this is new strata properties. In fact, the additional strata properties this year was something in the neighborhood of 600 additional properties. So what you will see here as a result, there's going to be very minimal tax increase for existing strata owners because the tax rates have gone down, and they've gone down by more than the average assessment rate went up. So that's not going to be every property, obviously, because it is an average, but it just means in general, you're going to look at something that looks similar to this, whereby the average strata assessment is 1.6. And then we have a comparison where, the downtown building is 0 pretty much, and the one in Tantalus is 2%. And those numbers, given the reduction in the tax rate, those numbers are going to generate a reduction year on year in the amount of tax collected from an existing strata townhouse, or strata property, I guess would be more accurate. So lastly, we're going to show the same analysis applied to Class 6 business assessment. And you'll note that this picture looks very similar to the picture that you saw for strata, in that all of the growth is developed. In fact, in this instance, all of the increase in assessment is developed from growth, from new business assessment. The market value of the existing business assessment went down by 1.2%. So it's lower in 2020 than it was in the previous year. And when you think about the struggles the businesses have had in the last year due to COVID and other things, that probably shouldn't really be surprising, that the assessed value of business property has not increased at all or is flat. But there's been a lot of growth in assessment of new business, and therefore we're seeing a dramatic increase in business assessment, and as a result of that, a dramatic increase in taxation from business, but new business. lastly, well, I think it's almost lastly. So our comparison of representative businesses and the overall amounts, and as you can see from the depiction on the last slide, the overall amount shows an increase in average assessment and therefore an increase in the average amount of taxation. But that's somewhat misleading, and the reason that it's misleading is that existing businesses did not see an increase in their assessed value. So all of the additional taxation that we're getting from business in 2021 is a result of new business development, new buildings, new assessment. And so this is a good news story for existing businesses because in all likelihood, their taxes will not go up. In fact, in many instances, there's a reasonable potential that their taxes will go down. So given the climate and given some of the pressures that businesses are facing, we think that that's a good news story for them. And that is the end of the slideshow that I have. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point and turn it back to the chair for any questions that you may have.
Council?
And
Look, you've wowed them, Mr. Russell, with your.
I'm stumped. I'm thinking there's got to be some questions.
Mr. Russell, I have a question. There is a property class 3 for supportive housing,
Yes.
and we don't have anything there. So what is included in that, and what does it look like for us going forward now that we have supportive housing projects being built?
My response to that question is that I would need to do some research to be able to look further into what is classified as supportive housing, and also to ensure that the supportive housing projects that are underway within the town, I believe that you're probably referring to Buckley Avenue, would qualify for that class, and then from there be able to determine the specifics of what the tax rate would be that would be applied to them. So I can't answer that question at this point in time. I have not done the appropriate research.
Mr. Buxton usually lurks behind the scenes and has something to add.
I see him there, and I'm hoping he can jump in.
Actually, Mr. Russell actually did a fairly good coverage of the basic points. Ms. Klassen and I had this discussion, and I think either this year or as part of next year's tax year, we need to go through all of the affordable and supportive housing that we have and set that defining line as to where it will sit, and set that accordingly. That's work we need to do and is on our to-do list.
Right. Okay. That's helpful. So we actually have some discretion in establishing what is in class 3 for our community and what is not.
I believe we do, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, Council? Council Pango.
Thanks. And just anticipating a question that I think I'll get in the community. Some of the slides, they compared different impacts for single family versus strata versus multifamily. But as I understand it, we can only set a single rate for residential as a whole. And the only reason there are differences in those classes is because of trends in BC assessment that we can't respond to or change different sort of subsets of residential. We just set the residential rate. And just looking to clarify that.
Through the chair, yes, that is correct. The LGA sets out the rules, and they're very explicit. There can only be one one tax rate per class, unless you're looking at a class that's been capped or has other specific, and please understand, specific legislated classifications, such as the Ports Property Act, where they specify you can have a different rate for the port than Class 4 major industry. No such tax break, or that's maybe not the right term, but no such differentiation, for example, is allowed within the residential class. Residential is residential, so everybody's going to pay the same rate, and within business, it's the same thing. So a big box store, a mom and pop shop, sorry, that's hard to say a couple times in a row, on Cleveland versus the Walmart, unfortunately, we don't have a choice. They're going to pay the same tax rate. Obviously, their assessments are going to be different, so the total tax burden, their dollars paid, will be different. But we don't have, council doesn't have a say in that. That is legislative.
Thank you. That's a good explanation.
Anything else? Right, so council, there's a resolution on our agenda, which is that we receive the tax rate workshop presentation and provide direction to set the 2021 District of Squamish tax rate bylaw. You're moving that, Councilor Pena? Or a seconder? Seconded by Councilor Stoner. Any comments? Councilor Rice.
Thank you. It's actually, thinking back, it was 2009, as a matter of fact, my first budget year, after I was first elected, where we lowered these rates to for commercial and for light industry down to the BC average. And my recollection is that the numbers were 2.7 for commercial and 3.5 for light industry. And we tried to maintain it below there. And we did that for competitive reasons. We were entering a recession. We wanted to attract business. And that's the reason we brought them down. It seems now that the light industry rate has come up. Somebody talking? It seems that the light industry rate has now sort of separated a little bit from the BC average, but we might consider that in future years, just to increase the amount that light industry contributes to the overall burden. But I don't think this is the year for that. So I would be inclined to just leave it as is, and happy to support this resolution.
Thank you. Councilor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll be supporting the resolution. I'm still a little bit shocked at the rate of growth that we've seen in our community over the past year. It definitely does help with the general tax burden, but is something I don't think we can get necessarily comfortable with. It will help this year, lowering the overall tax ask for the existing properties. I am encouraged to see that we are keeping the business rate below the BC average, as well as the light industry. I think that's the right thing to do this year. And still keeping it competitive, those tax ratio rates competitive with those in neighboring communities in the Sea to Sky corridor. So thanks to staff for their work, and happy to support the motion.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And we'll see you in 2 weeks with the bylaw.
Excellent. Thank you. Council, I need a motion to close. Moved by Councilor Herford, seconded by Councilor Anderson. Any opposed? It carries. So you just need to change the links.